Are we ready to start? Good evening, colleagues, and a warm welcome to the publication launch and panel discussion of Educational Success, the Hackney Picture. It's my pleasure to host you this evening. Thanks to Annie, Director of Education in Hackney, for inviting me, and also to support you with your panel discussion this evening. The session this evening will be recorded, and so there'll be an opportunity to kind of reflect and then look back over some of the key discussion points. And really, I'll be taking you through the evening with the panel members, highlighting some of the key points of this exciting publication, as well as some time towards the end for a panel discussion. So you may well know, but if you don't, this publication really does take the time, and I had a read through and it certainly excited me. But before I do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Anita Stewart, and I'm the Director of Education, Inclusion and Achievement in the London Borough of Newham, so in the neighbouring authority. So this, for me, was particularly exciting as someone on that northeast London patch. But this publication describes the picture of success across the education system in Hackney. It outlines the family of schools and settings and how different partners are working together cohesively to collaborate and contribute to the best outcomes for your children and young people in Hackney. It was really pleasing to read how the publication focuses in on how a local authority-led system works to embed ambition and inclusion for all. I think a real opportunity, as Councillor Bramble said, to reset and rethink the landscape for education in Hackney. In my role as Director of Education in Newham, it aligns very well with me as we navigate through an evolving, very fast-paced, evolving and multi-layered educational system, and really, for me, highlights the importance of taking a holistic and systemic view to really drive forward.
I think, Anita, you flipped onto mute, so I can pick up the baton. Or do you want to tell your...
I'm back with you. So I was just sort of reflecting on the complexity and multi-layered nature of the education system, and how important it is to really take that holistic view and kind of collective vision and accountability for educational outcomes and experiences for children and young people. A system that's inclusive, led by inclusive leaders, ultimately then delivering an inclusive economy. And I think that's exactly what this publication provides the opportunity to think about. An approach that's committed to work for every single child in Hackney. So very, very exciting, and look forward to hearing some of the discussions this evening. Before we start, I'll just introduce you to who we've got on the panel this evening. So we've got Mayor Philip Glanville, who's your Mayor of Hackney, Councillor Antoinette Bramble, Deputy Mayor of Hackney and Lead Member for Children in Education, Annie Gammon, Director of Education in Hackney Council, Stephen Hall, who's the Assistant Director for Hackney Education, School Improvement and Performance, Nicole Reid, Executive Head Teacher at the New Wave Federation, and Chris Brown, Principal at the Bridge Academy in Hackney. So I think you'll agree, a very rich and kind of a wealth of knowledge and expertise across the education landscape in Hackney and of course beyond. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Annie Gammon, who will just give us an outline of the publication and what it contains before moving on. Thanks, Annie. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Anita. As Anita said, I'm Annie Gammon. I'm Director of Education for Hackney, a position I've been very proud to hold for just over 3 years. And before that, I've worked for 25 years as a teacher and head teacher in North East London. So in this publication, what we really want to do is share and celebrate the local authority-led approach to making sure that education for every child in Hackney is as good as it possibly can be. We provide, we think, a cohesive local education system underpinned by some absolutely key values of ambition, inclusion, and care. And we work centrally, I work centrally on that, but the significant work really happens in our schools and settings, and I'm really pleased that Nicole and Chris are here representing head teachers, school staff, for all the work that they do on the front line. And of course, particularly that's been particularly challenging and continues to be so over the past 2 years as you've steered things through the pandemic, and I hope we've supported you well with that. Some of the things we talk about in the publication are about the history, the journey of Hackney education, and I know Councillor Bramble and the Mayor may touch on that further. We also want to say things about, we go on to say things about the organisation of Hackney education and how that organisation, based on those values of ambition, inclusion and care, work to make sure that every school and setting is as good as it possibly can be, so that every child receives the best possible education from their first day in a nursery through primary school, secondary school to post-16, and we make sure that's as good as it can be, working together and ensuring as much as possible our colleagues in schools and settings can work together and develop. We also talk in the publication about the strength of the local authority, its democratic accountability to the people, and also the join-up that happens across other services, particularly those for children, but also in terms of our work with parks, with school streets, etc., and the real strength of working together as a local authority, leading education to be the best it possibly can be. Anita, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Annie. And could I take the opportunity to hand the baton over to Councillor Bramble, just to share some of your reflections from the publication and what really was important to you?
Thank you, Anita, for facilitating this evening. And it was just really important for me for us to reflect on our journey of where we are, how we got here, and just revisit and re-collaborate and really focus in on why does the system work and what strengthens it, and actually what can we do further to maybe strengthen that system. It's our job as a local authority and the political leadership to ensure that we create life-changing opportunities for our children and young people. Hackney has an incredibly aspirational outlook for our children and young people, and that comes from the young people themselves, parents and carers, the school, the wider community, and the council's ethos and approach is working for every child, and of course what we advocate and champion as political leads. Practically, what does that mean? It means that we're working in partnerships, settings and wider organisations and voluntary sector, which I think is quite key as well, which is part of that partnership to ensure that every setting is really exciting and inviting. You want an environment that advocates curiosity for children to learn and is inclusive. Most of our schools are good or outstanding and are constantly performing above the national average. But not just that, they provide brilliant extracurricular activities, and that's so, so important because, you know, unless you've been in a classroom, I used to be a teacher, and you've got a child strumming on the desk, and it might be difficult when you're teaching maths, but when it's time for music, you'll see that child soar. And actually, when you have extracurricular activities, you get to see that. That's also supported by our youth hubs and our adventure playgrounds and libraries, which are free provisions. Central to this and key to this is the role of the local authority to have a cohesive local system that holds that all together, or for want of a better word, the middle tier. And I think the local authority is best placed to do that work. We work together in partnerships to ensure that we can get the best expertise, professionals, and promote collaborative working, especially peer-to-peer and school improvement, which is key, and ensuring that we're offering the right pathways for our professionals while providing the right support for our children. Hackney is a strong structure, and it ensures that we harness on the best that we have to see in each. One example is that all of our primary schools, for example, they all do Spanish. And again, that was because the local authority took that approach. We also can do things like working on reducing exclusion rates, driving inequalities. I had an idea of the diverse curriculum of Black contribution. Hackney Education developed it. Hackney teachers wrote it. Over 2,000 schools have signed up to that. It's bigger than Hackney because some of those schools are outside of the country. A local authority is best placed to do that outstanding work. You know, the government tried to have a whole academised system, and because people lobbied, campaigned, and there was outcry, they turned back from it, actually. And I don't think you repair a fragmented system by having a one-size-fits-all. I think there's a role for the local authority, and I think with the white paper looming, I think people think that. We are not against academies. Academies are part of Hackney success. We work in partnership with our academies. Our academies buy our training services just like our maintained schools, but we are against forced academisation. It doesn't work for every school, and it's really important that that is heard. We are centralised, and we have that overview of the borough, and we have our children and young people in mind. And what makes Hackney the success it is that all of our schools buy into that family of schools. And just like all families, there's some families that you see all the time, and there's other families that are estranged, and other families that you only see now and again, but everybody's family, and that is the strength of our school. The last thing that I will say before Mayor comes in, this is deliberate and intentional. It didn't happen by accident. It's sheer political will and dedicated officers in the council with our school system of partners that have made it work, and obviously working in partnership with our young people and their parents and carers. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you. A real kind of commitment to the strength of the partnership there, and despite the kind of real credible foundation that Hackney system's already on, a drive for continuous improvement towards excellence. Thank you. Over to Mayor Glanville with some of your reflections, please.
Thanks, Anita, and I think you'll get some themes hopefully coming across from what Annie and Deputy Mayor Bramble's already said. A bit of an overview. Clearly, Hackney, like many places in central and east of London, has gone through an immense amount of transformation and innovation over the last 2 decades. And I think the council and political leadership have worked really hard to redefine the standards that local authorities can achieve. And my predecessor and myself have worked really hard with a team to renew the infrastructure of our borough. We've, though never, I think, and it was something that came across in 2016 when we were celebrating the LGC borough of the last 2 decades, we clearly said, I think early on, that our economic financial position nor deprivation was an excuse for poor quality services or outcomes. And that stretches across kind of everything that we do. And I think whether it's education or wider services or public spaces, we see them as some of the very best in the country. And we changed through that work, not just the reputation of the council, but I think Hackney itself, and brought innovation, investment and jobs to our borough. And it's clear that, you know, it's one of the best places, if not the best place, to live or work or bring up a family. And at the heart, I think, of all of that success, and arguably when you think about the impact on the individuals and citizens, the achievement of our school system has to be something that we wanted to celebrate in this publication. You know, go back to the start of that journey, and 20 years ago, Hackney had the lowest attainment in the country. And now we're amongst the 10% best performing education authorities in the country. Back then, at one stage, more than half of all primary schools students at this point in the year were looking forward to a secondary education outside the borough. Now families actively seek to move and stay in the borough to access the fantastic secondary schools, setting new standards for inner city education. I believe this transformation is one of the great success stories of public policy in the country, and it's only been achieved through the collaboration between the council and every education setting in the borough. And I think those education settings are represented on this call. So this isn't about just one part of the system. There still obviously remains in the borough huge disparities of wealth, high levels of poverty and need. So this journey is nowhere near complete. And I think you'll get that if you read the publication. We have to keep coming back to everything that Deputy Mayor Bramble said, creating those life-changing opportunities in the borough for those that most need them. And this starts with that inclusive education system from birth upwards, as Annie said. I believe we've got that strong political and office commitment to continue that culture of continuous improvement, ambitious and excellence in education. Absolutely critical to that has been a political focus, and that transcends whatever national government policy might be. And I think we've learned to ride the changes in national government policy, hone and adapt them for Hackney, and make them work in our context. And that's what we will always do to ensure that we continue to see improvements for our citizens. I've written a section in the introduction. It's got a long list of achievements, and a lot of that is about the physical changes in our borough's education estate. I know that without high quality teachers, support staff, working with trade unions, bringing those fantastic buildings alive, it's not just, and it never has just been about bricks and mortar, but we're obviously really proud that our work has continued across our school estate and those fantastic new buildings. And I've never taught in a classroom like Deputy Mayor Bramble, but I used to tour the borough's schools and remember my school days, and it's easy to bank the change. I no longer think like this because I've been to so many Hackney schools. But you know, we do not have schools that lack facilities or have outdoor facilities when they should be indoor, and you know, they don't have to raise money to get a new computer. That was the type of environment I grew up in London schools. I'd just sort of like to finish and say the inclusion portion of the publication is really important. I think about where we go next, and whether that's around that diverse curriculum, accountability, the work on exclusions, the real focus we have on special educational needs. All of that, I think, is something that only the council can bring to an education system. You know, it's reflecting the needs of our population, what they tell us as a community, sometimes the challenge they bring to us and our school system. And ultimately, as Annie said at the start, we're the democratic part of that system, working with school governors, working with our community to make sure that we respond to the needs of our community. And I think our relationships are strong, really strong across the whole system. And I'm really proud of every single one of our schools. But we don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all model through forced academisation that comes in from the outside. Obviously, new ideas, accountability are really important, but we really hope that we can continue to have that family of schools. So to close, education is absolutely fundamental to the Hackney journey and story. Investing in buildings is really important, and there will be more investment, especially around SEND. But that vital part of the local cohesion and accountability piece is why I think marking this moment, looking at what the white paper might concede, really telling Hackney's story at every level is so important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. A real testament to how education absolutely underpins so much of what, you know, the whole experiences of a child from birth right through to 25 in many cases, but and beyond as well for families. And it was good to see in the publication real reference to the parents and carers and kind of members of the community in terms of understanding those lived experiences, particularly around inclusion, in order to be able to respond to the needs. Thank you. Okay, Nicole, I'd like to take this opportunity to hand over to you for you to just share with us your thoughts on how education in Hackney has been successful for your schools and your children.
Thank you, Anita, and good evening, everyone. Similar to, I guess, most of the people on this call, I'm extremely proud to be here. I'm the executive head teacher for New Wave Federation, and I lead 4 primary schools in Hackney, all different but reflect the diversity that we have in the borough. I've spent all my career here in Hackney. I'm proud to say that I've been part of the success and that journey to where we are today. I've had several positions rising through the ranks as class teacher, through all the leadership position to where I am now an executive head teacher of the 4 schools. I'm very proud, and I want to emphasize how proud I am to lead the 4 schools, but also to work with the colleagues in Hackney to develop a curriculum that is bespoke and designed to support all children, but in particular children from a disadvantaged background. That's something that I'm passionate about, to support our families, to support our children, so that they can be the best they can be and be successful. Things in schools have been challenging over the past 2 years, but even moving forward, it will be even more of a challenge for our poorest families. And as school leaders, and we know that, and we know that we have to work even harder because these children have the furthest to go and have the greatest need. And so what we do here in Hackney is to ensure that we put our curriculum first. and ensure that through our approach, we offer our children the best and most up-to-date skills that they need to access the reading, writing, and mathematics. That's something that we're proud of, and that's something that we support our children with so that they can be successful as they move into secondary school. I'm proud to say how hard we have worked and collaborate with other schools to ensure that we have that network of support available for all children. We're very insistent with children in Hackney who are behind, so we confidently ensure that all of the children who are fallen behind have the support and their success are being celebrated. We take great advantage of the resources that we have, and by working across Hackney and in all 4 schools, we have the capacity as leaders to support each other, and that's something that I'm very, very proud of. In addition to that support, what we're able to do as leaders is to collaborate on our curriculum and build and design our curriculum to meet the needs of our children here in Hackney. So if, like any historian, scientist, we build change in our curriculum to reflect the needs or the fresh perspective or research that is available to support our children. And that's something that we constantly review and build on and ensure that we refine our curriculum. And if there's a need for it to evolve and be different to reflect that need, then that's something that we're proud to build in. Similarly, in all schools, you will see our curriculum now reflect the need for our diversity in our curriculum, the need around sustainability. So what you'll see in Hackney School, there is a built-in curriculum for to address the sustainability and also the challenge that we have faced with climate change. So for us, it's a testimony of our hard work in ensuring that our curriculum has integrity, it can stand the test of time, but also reflective of what we need to do to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And before I move on to Chris, there's really something about that evolving and responsive approach or a bespoke, tailored approach to children. And something that struck me is around how we fit the system to the child rather than fitting a child into the system. And I think you kind of put that together quite well. Thank you, Nicole. Chris, over to you. A little bit about how Education Hackney has been successful for your school and pupils.
Yes, thank you, Anita. So just a tiny bit of background on me before I talk about that. So my name is Chris Brown. I'm the principal at the Bridge Academy. I've been at Bridge, well, this is my 7th year now, so six and a half odd years. I've worked all over East London as a teacher and senior leader, and a little bit of time in West London as well as a primary school teacher. So I have a good experience of a large number of secondary and primary settings. Hackney, I've absolutely loved having the opportunity to work in Hackney. I think the first thing I would pick up on is, and Annie, Mayor Glanville, Nicole have all made this point, is about the level of ambition that there is for students in Hackney. There's a desire, and it's palpable, for Hackney schools to be the very best schools in the country and even beyond. And that's a serious and genuine desire, and it's a realistic aim as well, and we know that, and we want to achieve that, and that is a fantastic thing to be a part of. And I think what I've also found really special about ambition in Hackney is that, of course, there is huge ambition for us to ensure that students get the best possible results, GCSE and A-level, and go on to the best pathway, and that is massively important. Those results really are the key. But what struck me when I came here is also there was this ambition about quality of education, this ambition about really high quality curriculum that's both, really challenging academic, but also the right curriculum for our students. And the idea of how important it is that schools really offer personal development opportunities. And, these were discussions that were being had in Hackney schools long before they became part of the Ofsted framework. And there were things that, when I moved here, really brought my thinking on immediately about what a really world-class school should look like and what it means to be part of the education system in Hackney. So, you know, the something that really always strikes me about Hackney, something I love about being part of Hackney, is that just that level of ambition, that drive to offer the absolute best possible education. And I think, you know, what's interesting is that when you talk about ambition in education, it's often taken, you know, as being something that doesn't sit terribly well with inclusion. And Hackney stands in really sharp contrast to that. You know, I mean, Annie was saying earlier about the fact that you know, the second value that they have is around inclusion, and of course, care is so important as well. And I think, you know, there are so many ways again that you see that in everyday working, that inclusive approach, that idea of making sure that the most vulnerable child is fully supported. And so I was kind of looking at a few of these when I was preparing for this. I mean, I was thinking about things like our work with Young Hackney and Hackney Social Care, and, you know, contextual safeguarding team, and all of the information that gives us, that helps us to support these children. But actually, the one that really stood out for me, because we've been doing a lot of work with them recently, is the WAMS project, so the Wellbeing and Mental Health in Schools project. And I think, you know, this really does speak to what Hackney's about, because these are mental health practitioners, mental health experts, who give us advice, give us guidance, help us all raise our game in terms of supporting our students. They come and work in our schools, they increase the capacity we have to support our most vulnerable. You know, it really is an incredibly strong statement of intent from Hackney about how important it is to make sure that the most vulnerable children are able to access the same quality of education. You know, and that ambition is true for absolutely everybody, every child that we serve. And you know, I think it's a really special project. It's been an absolute privilege to be a part of it. And the other thing that I've really loved about Hackney is the team ethos amongst the head teachers. And I think, you know, you could quite easily look at Hackney from the outside and see these various different schools, academies, maintained schools, etc., and think that it might be a bit atomized. And I would say that that really couldn't be any further from the truth. I've been very fortunate for the last few years to chair the Secondary Heads Committee. Before that, Annie did a fabulous job on that as well. And, you know, that's a group which, I mean, for one thing, it's been fantastic in terms of raising standards, because we share so much good practice. We really hold each other to account, you know, kind of informally as well as formally. There's that, as I say, that desire, that ambition. But also, the thing about that group is that there's this real buy-in that you get from the head teachers working together. So if you look at things which, you know, sometimes can be quite contentious, like fair access panel, and I know that's referenced in this publication. What was so good about, you know, the recent review of that was the way that it was worked through with all the head teachers together. So you get that real sense of buy-in, you get everybody wanting to work together. And again, you know, going back to this idea of making sure the most vulnerable child is supported, the way to do that is to ensure that we're all working together, that we all have, you know, the same core vision, that we're all trying to achieve the same thing and make sure that every child in Hackney achieves the very, very best they can. So, yeah, I mean, that's been my experience of Hackney. It's, as I said at the beginning, I've really loved it.
Thank you, Chris. Definitely a great place to kind of lead a group of schools, and particularly your points around having that real ambition that absolutely drives forward what you do, but also in a holistic and enriching way, and thinking about outcomes. Yes, that's the end product, but it's also about the experiences, isn't it, that our children have within the system. So thank you. Stephen, I know we're running a little over time, but I wanted to come to you just to hear more about school improvement and what's the importance of taking that joined up approach, please.
Yeah, of course, and I think what Chris has outlined really clearly there is how joined up it is in Hackney. It's a very coherent system. It doesn't matter if you're an academy or a maintained school, we're all focused on the same outcome, which is young people. We want the best for young people, we want them to have the best experience. But what it adds, having a strong local authority in the centre of that, means that can be coordinated and can carry that journey forward for young people right the way through from nursery right the way through into post-16 and beyond. And I think the reason why school improvement in Hackney has been successful over the years is because it's built on that understanding of the context of Hackney and the locality of Hackney and the communities of Hackney. And it's also built on that mutual respect and dialogue that goes behind that understanding that working in schools and being in a school can be challenging, but also understanding from a parent's perspective, it can be challenging taking your child to school and balancing that from your experiences too. And there's been that real focus on what we can add and what the additionality there is, but also what the schools are offering. And we have a really strong estate of schools in Hackney, and some, really high performing schools. So it's recognising those strengths in our system, amplifying those, sharing that best practice, at the same time looking for those schools perhaps where things are slipping, where children aren't getting the best deal anymore, and they should be, and they deserve it, and not waiting for the disaster to happen, but intervening as early as possible. Every year in a child's life in school really counts. There's a finite amount of time that you get to be in school, and learn in that way. So reaching out, spotting those warning signs, and then looking for colleagues to support, giving that support in relation to the need. So not just running in and overwhelming a school, but understanding where the school is in its journey, what the capacity is there, and then identifying other schools that could potentially support. And we have a really long track record of doing that, of joining up schools where there's strengths in one area and not in another, and whether that's on a more permanent basis or on a temporary basis, finding expertise on the ground and drawing from that and using that then to drive experiences for young people in other schools too. And we've got many, many examples of schools benefiting from that and improving. And that's one of the reasons why the school system in Hackney continues to sustain itself. And our role really is to identify that and steer it and direct it in a way that only a local authority is in the position to do. And I think all schools are benefiting from that strong local authority role that's coordinating the work of schools, but not just schools, but all the other agencies too that work with schools. So we have strong links with children's social care, with public health, with buildings, with school streets and so forth. All these other agencies within the council that liaise with us and work directly with schools. And both Nicole and Chris have talked about that rich curriculum experience. All of those things linked to that, eco schools and so forth, making sure that there's a rich, wide and well-informed offer, and that we're drawing from that really rich resource that the Hackney Council has.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think, just to pick up on your point of the importance of early intervention, and I think what I've heard in terms of a theme that's coming through is Hackney take a real relational approach to kind of how it addresses the education system. So yes, there's accountability and there's very clear expectations, but also in good measure high levels of support and kind of coming together, which I think is the perfect set of ingredients, isn't it, for success for children and young people. Annie, as we think ahead, what next? Over to you.
Thank you. And I think there's we're really proud of what's been achieved and what is being achieved day in and day out in our schools and settings, but we're not complacent, and we know that things change around us sometimes, not through things that we're driving forward, but things happening in London, in the country, central government directives, and we need to be in a really strong position to respond to those. But as we look ahead, and there's a section at the end of the publication that talks about this, I think there are some key themes that Councillor Bramble and Mayor Glanville have talked about ambition and inclusion. Nicole, Chris and Stephen have reflected on those. We have a really high proportion of our children at good or outstanding schools. We want that to be 100%, so very determined about that, to make sure that, as Stephen said, every child from the moment they step into a school has a good day every day, that we get to that as much as possible. And that is in all our schools. In Hackney, we also have a significant number of independent schools in our Orthodox Jewish community. We want to work with them further to make sure that as many of those schools as possible are also that good or outstanding level. So reaching out and collaborating further with all groups of schools. In terms of inclusion, Councillor Bramble talked about the diverse curriculum. We want to see that evolve further and be embedded in every school to make sure that every child, when they're learning, hears about a history that reflects them, and about a story that reflects them in different subjects. We also know that in terms of outcomes for some of our groups of children, that some don't do as well as others, and we want to make sure that that changes and that continued ambition really turns into good practice for every single child. Mayor Glanville talked about our inclusive approach and wanting to do our very best for our children with SEND. and we expect to provide 300 more specialist places inside Hackney. At the moment, we have more children than we would like going to provision outside the borough. So we have a plan to have more specialist places in Hackney over the coming 3 years. And in terms of care and wellbeing, as you said, Anita, building on what Chris had talked about, we're going to really expand our early help offer for children and families so that every child, if they need help at any point, can find it easily and get it easily before it gets to a more critical stage. And also in terms of organisation, I talked about things that aren't perhaps so much in our control, but how we respond to them is, I think, two things to say. One is we need to manage our school place situation as we have slightly fewer children in the borough. So we're working with schools closely to do that, to make sure that all schools can continue to manage well for all the children that they have and will have in the future. And I think we want to respond, and this publication is part of it, to respond to the government white paper coming out and really make sure that we set out our stall as a local authority-led education system.
So lots to do, and as you said at the beginning, Annie, there's no space or room for complacency here. It's continuing that drive for excellence. Okay, we'll spend the last part of this session with some questions, some more kind of directed questions, and I'll invite you to share your thoughts on those. So the first one is, I'll start with Mayor Glanville and then move on. You have academies in Hackney that you're clearly very proud of and which are largely successful. Why don't you want more?
Thanks, Anita. And I think this can sometimes come across as a sort of confusing perspective, especially given the sort of political debate around academies outside the borough. And I think Chris really articulated kind of our approach and our work with academies and why we value them, and they're part of that broader system. And if I go back to the origin sort of story of my sort of predecessor in the administration, they thought really long and hard about who should be sponsoring the Hackney academies, what they would bring to the borough, and the partnerships they wanted to build with those academy sponsors. So the work that UBS did around Bridge and continue to sort of do, and the pride that they have, it was really great to be down there with Chris just before the pandemic, celebrating 10 years at Bridge. If you apply that to each of our academies, I think there's a really strong connection between sponsor, council, place, and what's been achieved. That came from that collaboration, not a forced approach. Obviously, it was a tool of government, but I think if you think about all the things that Chris has listed and others have talked about, what Annie talks about to the future, if you don't have an LEA sitting there, an education department sitting there, that will wither. And it's about the resources that can sit around that can draw in, as Stephen said, public health, that can draw in social care, the work that Young Hackney do as our youth part of the council. And for me, it is having that sense that there is a role for the council in all of that. And so much of the government rhetoric around driving up standards, academisation, independence, just misses all of that and almost treats that as an afterthought in a political back and forth about, we're never going to go back to a strong LEA where everything was controlled by the centre, and I'd be trying to, attempt by the back door, front door to manage what happens in a school where the head knows with their governing body and their community how to run a school. We're not seeking to turn the clock back in any way, but it is that challenge about how we continue going forward in the way that we have. And I just feel, remote schools commissioners, we saw some of that, taking place with the department around some of the way that they've managed the pandemic. Actually, someone like Annie as head of the education department, working with public health, achieved so much more in the context of Hackney than repeated edicts from the centre. And we must never forget, and this would be my final point, that it's often set up as we want to release schools to do more as independent organisations away from their local authority. Actually, what it means is schools and a strong centre in Whitehall and missing out the bit in between. There's still all of that control. It's just not the influence and role of the local authority. And I think that, again, isn't the way we take forward a system and work in true partnership at a local level. So really support our academies, really support what they've achieved for the borough and will continue to achieve. It's that what we would lose if we didn't have all the things we've been talking about tonight. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
And people often misrepresent our view.
And you've spoken about bricks and mortar a little bit earlier, and I was thinking about glue and cohesion, and perhaps what that, some of what you said that the local authority can really offer in terms of that, bringing that together. Stephen, and then I'll come to you, Nicole, for the same question.
Yeah, sure. It's true. This isn't about academies versus maintained schools. This is about getting the best out of the mixed economy that we have and taking advantage of that. And I think some of this is about rebalancing that narrative. It's recognising that local authorities have a significant place in the system, and in the fact that we're uniquely placed to influence and impact on young people's lives in a very systemic way. And we have a strong voice in doing that. And it's about drawing together rather than fragmenting. And I think that's the strength of the system that we have currently in Hackney.
Thank you, Stephen. And Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Anita, I can say that I have a really strong working relationship with Hackney Education, and I've always have, hence why I've been in Hackney for so long, and I feel very supported by the local authority. And I feel confident that when I raise my point of view or need to fight my corner for the children in my federation, I have a platform to do that and do that responsible, like all executive ed teacher would do in Hackney. So, I'm not here to pass a judgment because on academies or a decision to go ahead and encourage more or not. But what I'm saying that my main focus and why I love working in Hackney and stay in education is to support our children, and I will do everything I can in my powers to focus on what the experiences are like for them day in, day out in our school, and that's my number one job at the moment.
And that's a great kind of mantra to hold on to, and certainly one I think that's coming through as a definite theme. Thank you. I'm going to put these questions to Annie, Councillor Bramble and Chris. So you talk about the success of the system, and there's lots of examples that have already come through, but there are still some concerns around, for example, exclusions. What are you doing about this? Annie, if I could start with you.
Yes, I hope the fact that we're proud but not complacent came across, and I know that exclusions is one of the key areas where we want to significantly improve both the early help that gets to pupils if they are in need, so that we can make sure they stay in mainstream as much as possible, and that development of the early help offer. Particularly those of you who work in Hackney know about the re-engagement unit. The extension of that to secondary level is really important and something we're looking forward to happening in the autumn. I think the other aspect is thinking about the investment that Hackney has put into its pupil referral unit in terms of New Regents College, which is in a great building. We're very much looking forward to building on the good work that's been going on in New Regents College to reach out further to prevent exclusion wherever possible. We know sometimes it's difficult for a school to keep a child in that school, but also that collaborative approach that we've heard about, where children might be able to take up a place in another school, making that work even better.
Thank you, Annie. Councillor Bramble, over to you.
Thank you so much. I feel that Hackney is a very good, very strong system. In order to be world class, this is one of the things that we need to combat. And I think if it can be done anywhere, it can be done in Hackney. If we can be known as some of the best educators, I think we can be known as the best local authority that has done a thoughtful piece on what reducing exclusion looks like. Some of the things that we've done is that we have a reducing exclusions network board that head teachers sit on, and Annie and I sit on that as well. We've set out guidance policies on behaviour for schools, so we've put that in place. We have the re-engagement unit, and that is officers that work with schools, with parents and young people when children are at risk of exclusions and offer an array of support. We have a young Hackney worker that's linked to secondary schools to support the work there. I need to take the time, Anita, though, to commend the work of the primary sector. We talk about when we get it wrong in secondary. we don't talk about how the primary sector has held our children. For several years, there's been no exclusions in our primary school, and that has been down to the sheer determination and grit of the primary sector. I don't highlight that as a criticism of the secondary, but I highlight it because there are lessons to learn. And we have to think about, in that transitional moment, what is it that we're doing to hold our children and support them in the primary, that when we transition to secondary, that some of that gets lost? And how do we better work with our secondaries to do that? And many of them really had good examples. We've piloted a no need to exclude in year 7s, and that has gone really, really well. So I really want to commend our secondary schools of coming alongside this, because we've been on a journey, and actually I think there's a real buy-in now and a strong willingness in our secondary schools that maybe wasn't there before for different reasons, different commitments, but they absolutely are front and centre of this charge now. Well, the last thing I'll say as well is that the work with our in-house clinician system has been key to that. You know, the psychology, working with specialists within the school system, is one thing that we're doing differently to better support children, families and the school system in terms of supporting our children, because ultimately it's about how we better support children. As a teacher, I used to be an assistant head, there are consequences for children if things go wrong, but actually let's find consequences that don't disrupt education in the way that exclusion does, and get children feeling in the way that we do.
Thank you, Councillor Bramble. Thank you. And Chris, if I could put the same question to you, please.
And Anita, last thing, gosh, I've been terrible. The mayor and I worked with officers and with Annie, and we've got a member of staff now that just works with parents. And we have one dedicated member of staff that works solely for parents. Some of that work is around schools, but it is also to help us reduce and address exclusions, so parents understand how to support parents in their role in the system as well, and just a resource to help us tackle it. And that's something that the mayor has supported me with, to ensure that we have that for Hackney Education as well.
Thank you, and a really valuable addition there, because it's not always the easiest system to navigate through, is it? So giving that sort of direct support, I'm sure will pay off with your families. Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is an area where, as Hackney has continued to evolve, and as you know, as that ambition that I was talking about earlier has been continued to be made reality, there's more and more energy and focus around reducing exclusions. I think one of the key parts of being really ambitious is challenge. And that is the challenge that has very clearly been laid down to schools, is that this is something that we all have to work together to make happen if we're going to be, as Councillor Bramble said, if we're going to be a truly world-class education system in Hackney. And I know that that's certainly something that's impacted on us and has really impacted on our practice. And I also know that secondary heads share best practice around strategies for reducing exclusions, again, both formally and informally. And that's something that the Hackney Education really supports us with. I think I would also just pick up on a couple of things, sort of the impact on the ground of some of the things in particular that Annie's mentioned. I mean, so, there are occasions where it's the case that it's challenging for a child to stay at the school, either, for a period of time, or perhaps there's a situation where maybe it is better if the child starts again. And in those situations, the question is, well, how can we do that in a way which best supports the young person? And how can we do that in a way which avoids them having the state of an exclusion on their record? And this is something which, we've seen real change with Hackney over the last few years. The improvement in new regents, the significant additional offers now that there are from new regents around supporting people, around getting in early, and making those interventions before we come to the point where we need to exclude, so that support is available, all the kind of turnaround work that new regents do. And then also, there's the formalisation of the managed move process. So that in those situations where actually a child does need a new start, because we all know that young people sometimes make mistakes, they can get a new start at another really excellent school. And as I say, they can do that without having to be excluded. And that's something where you work in partnership with the parents and the two schools together to make sure that the child is able to then go on and continue their education and really flourish. So you know, this is, as I say, this is something where there's real energy and there's real drive and commitment to improving the situation. There's real buy-in, as Councillor Bramble said, and I mean, I totally agree with what she said about Hackney. If it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen here. We're going to make it happen.
Thank you, Chris. And I think with something that you've all said around drawing on the contextual knowledge within the local area and the expertise that's already within the system. Of course, there's lessons and best practice from outside of Hackney, but actually the richness of the expertise to kind of navigate through challenges and find those solutions is really within Hackney. So thank you. I'm going to attempt to combine the last couple of questions so that we've got time for our sort of final question, which everyone will contribute to. So I'll just come to a couple of you for this, if that's okay. So thinking of the post-COVID landscape as well as some of the context to this, and I'll be listening with ears pricked at this one. Is there any advice that you would give to other local authorities in taking forward educational success? So I'm going to come to Councillor Bramble first, then Annie, and then Stephen, if that's okay.
Thank you. I think there's an opportunity in terms of your facilitation and your role in the middle tier of the convenience. So it's bringing together networks, whether it's for governors, whether it's head teachers, assistant heads, whether it's for subject course leaders. I think those are core. Definitely work for governors. Your links with public health and how you distill that information to schools is key, but also work with unions. You know, Annie and I, through the pandemic, were in virtual rooms with our unions every single week. That was a given. It wasn't negotiable. It wasn't something they had to ask. It was something that Annie just made sure it happened. So it's how do you connect with your partners and what does their role look like? And it's thinking of what can you use to challenge the system. Something that the Mayor and I spoke about is something called Hackney Schools Group. And we set that up as a local authority to have that external challenge to think about how can we challenge us as a system, as a sector. You know, I don't share it, nor does Annie, because we want that external challenge too. And we wanted something different to go into the schools. And the Mayor and I did lots of visits around this. And one of the reasons why Hackney was one of the last local authorities to set up anything external, because we had such a good family of schools. Other local authorities had to have a response back to academisation first time round because I had nothing in place. But our family of schools was such a strong unit. So think of something that can hold schools to account. Try as much as you can to have a good improvement offer. And if I'm talking to political leads now, political will and financial commitment is key to this, and that will empower strong officers like Annie and Stephen to work with leaders like Nicole and Chris in the system to ensure we're doing the best for our children. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you. Annie?
I think I would say that making sure your underpinning values and ambition are really clear so that those underlie all your decision making. So we've talked about ambition, inclusion and care. I think those probably apply across the country and across the world, but you know, whatever they are for each area, so make sure that those are clear and threaded throughout. I think having the right relationships, and that requires having some of the right people to have the right relationships. And I think we have many teams in Hackney Education who work together well, but I particularly want to say that the school improvement team and their equivalents in early years have really strong relationships with head teachers, and that's been a key part of what we do. So people who have relationships with the head teachers are really important. And I think some of the right structures that bring head teachers together, that bring governors together. Councillor Bramble talked about the Hackney Schools Group Board that cut across different roles to bring together people with an interest in education. So the right structures are important.
Thank you, Annie. And over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is making sure that you're building on a common purpose, which is essentially what is the experience of young people and how can you use your position of authority to change and influence that and make it better. And there's no better driver than that. And that's the driver for school leaders, nursery leaders, parents, everybody. And that's one common language and one common dialogue. And I think it's take hold of that message and use it.
Thank you, Stephen. And I know that panel members haven't been able to rehearse all their answers together, but actually there's a real consistency coming through in the narrative. So thank you. Okay, we are on to the last question, and everyone has strict 60 seconds to respond to this. So I'll come to all of you for this. So what would you say to the Secretary of State for Education if you could get him to implement a key policy? So if I could start with Mayor Glanville.
Thanks, Anita. I think just pulling together everything that we've said, read our publication today, understand that places are different, that communities really want to see a degree of democratic accountability around the school system. Think about what works. I think leave the ideology behind, and I think you can leave the politics, you can leave the challenge, you can be values driven, you can be evidence-based, but leave the ideology behind and look at what works. Here in Hackney, it isn't the model everywhere. There will be different models. And I think retaining that funding and structure that allows local authorities to influence the education system. And as I say, not turning the clock back, not being ideological, but looking at what works. And I think that's what we've set out today. And that's all I'd ask them to do is read the publication and take the lessons from that and construct a white paper that can really enable this type of systems leadership, not damage it.
Thank you. Councillor Bramble.
Thank you. Yeah, to lead on to that, I suppose if, as the white paper's looming, in response to that, if I had to recommend a legislation, that legislation would be allow every council to be able to form MATs, so multi-academy trusts, giving local authorities that power to convene schools and hold them together. And within that, it then gives local authorities the powers to intervene in any school, irrespective of their status. And I think that's what's important and key. We have a mixed economy, and that is fine. But what local authorities want the powers to be able to do is intervene in any school, in any structure, any time, to support them. And then we're able to do things on a broader scale in things that we've mentioned before, whether it's the diverse curriculum or health and wellbeing, for example, the work we're doing on exclusions. And yes, we do that already, but that would be strengthened if we have with those powers. So yes, I'd have to go be boring and say legislation, please. If they're going to respond to us, let us form our multi-academy trust, please, if they want to have a fully academised system, because the local authority as the convener is a strong key network to empower schools and the wider community for our children.
Thank you. Let's watch this space on that one. Nicole.
So I've got two things that I would definitely encourage or advise that he kind of make a bold statement in the white paper about is a commitment to child poverty. That's something that I think we have to, as leaders, have a clear kind of vision around how we're going to eradicate that quickly, and also a commitment to children with emotional and social needs. We see a rising cases across the country in the borough about these children who the pandemic may have kind of impacted negatively on their social and emotional needs, and how he's going to continue to support them so that they can be successful and remain in school, in the right school that is going to allow them to be the best they can be.
Thank you, Nicole. Chris.
Yeah, I also have two, and they're quite, well, at least one of them is very similar to Nicole's. I think a commitment to SEN has to be an absolute core priority in anything the Secretary of State is doing at the moment. And the other thing, I suppose it's not really a policy, this is just a comment. I think a demonstration of an understanding that local knowledge matters, that whatever is being decided at the DfE, it needs to be translated so that it works for our young people, so that it's the right thing, the best thing for them.
Thank you very much, Chris. Stephen?
Yeah, I think I'd ask to rebalance that narrative and that power balance between regional schools commissioners and local authorities and the DfE, to get it more on an equal playing field, to get a better understanding of what role each of us plays. And at the moment, it's not as connected as it could be, or it's not as balanced as it could be. And if there's examples needed, to come and see a system working, come and see a local system working, come and visit us and have a look, and we'll show you.
Thank you, Stephen. And finally, Annie.
I'm going to echo some of the things we've heard already. I think legislation that allows for a strong, effective middle tier, locally led, with that local knowledge and with some sort of power and accountability to support and challenge our schools and settings to be the best they possibly can be. And then also, I've got a second one too, a well-planned, timely, inclusive approach to the development of the curriculum and what is required of schools in terms of the curriculum, so that there's plenty of chance for many people to say what they want to have in that, and again, leave the ideology behind and go for what works, what's best, with some local flexibility.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for such valuable contributions. I think we probably should have done 90 minutes or something, because we could have kept going, couldn't we? But I just wanted to, and I'll come to you in just a moment, Councillor Bramble, but I know that certainly from Councillor Bramble and Annie's perspective, they're very keen for this conversation to continue. This is just a marker, a flag, if you like, but very keen to keep this conversation going. And if you haven't read the publication, please do. I think it's a straightforward read, really sets out the commitment and ambition for a truly inclusive and caring and aspirational system for Hackney's children and young people, one that will continue to drive for excellence across the whole education system, and one that really values the strength that's within the partnership. So that's been a pleasure to hear about. And I think what I've heard today is examples of tangible, real things that are happening that will enable the system to have a strategy, a publication, but actually, more importantly, it becomes a reality and impacts positive outcomes and experiences for children and young people in Hackney. So thank you for having me this evening, and of course a huge thanks to our panel members this evening. And I look forward to hearing how it all goes in the not too distant future. Thank you. And I'll just hand over to Councillor Bramble.
I just wanted to thank you, Chair, as well, for facilitating this evening. And I suppose the last thought I want us to leave with, I mentioned being assistant head, but it was when I was a primary school teacher preparing lessons for children and resources and thinking about how I could make learning come alive. That's when I felt most creative. Teachers, education is part of the creative sector, but because of the regime of education, that is lost and missed. So any framework that goes on must empower teachers to revisit and have that freedom to be the creators that they are in education.
Thank you. And I think that's a great point to end on. So if you are an educator, keep space for that creativity, and enhancing those experiences for the children that you are committed to and work with. Thank you, everybody, and good night.